Welcome back, everybody. We are going to be beginning part 2 of this 3, maybe 4-part series on glazing. We are going to get our bisque pieces that we cleaned and waxed last week, and we're going to be dipping, pouring, and wiping them clean so that they start looking like these pieces in front of us. So that's something that you want to see. Stick around and find out how we do it. So here's our glaze area for our classroom. A lot of studios are more or less the same. You have a lot of glaze in a bucket. You mix it up and you either dip your piece, you pour glaze over it, wipe the bottom, and then you get it turned in. Now for our class is more or less the same. And we are going to be pouring glaze in on the inside of our piece. And I'm going to be showing you 2 different styles for this particular technique. The first one, I'm going to do my style that I do for most of my pieces, is where I pour the glaze inside, fill it to the brim, then I pour it out and I dip the rim, and then I let it pull out and dry. And so what happens is that creates a top glaze, and then after that dries, I hold the top and I dip the bottom into the glaze that I want for the second color, and that creates a nice, interesting overlap. And so that is the one that I like the most because it's just a little easier to do the second dip on the outside. Now, some of my students are really enjoying inside one color, outside another. But this poses more issues because after you pour it in and you pour it out, you have to clean up any glaze on the outside. And then you're going to have to either palm the top and dip the outside, and wherever your fingers touch are going to stay naked, or you're going to have to hold it like this and dip the outside and hope that you get all the way to the top so you don't have any naked spots like right here. So this one's a little harder. It looks really clean, but I'll show you both ways and you can decide which way that you like. And then in another video, I'll show some other glazing techniques if you guys are interested. So let me know in the comments below if that's something you want to see. So things that you'll need for glazing. You want to get a whisk to mix the glaze, a cup to pour the glaze, a sponge to wipe off any extra glaze, and then tongs is used to dip your piece fully if you want to just do a single dip. And so single dips are the easiest when you're learning. And all you do, this is an example, it's already glazed. You basically get the tongs, you clamp it usually on the inside like this so that you have the arms on the inside and outside. You fully submerge it into the bucket, count to the time that you need to dip it for, usually 1 to 3 seconds, pull it out, pour the glaze, wipe the bottom, and that's more or less done. When you release the tongs, it usually leaves little marks called vampire bites, and so you just gotta fill that in and smooth it out, and I can show you that in another video if you guys want to see that. Lots of things to show in glazing, so that's why it's glazing is such a very time-intensive teaching process. All right, anyway, for my glazes, I have on the bucket the name of it on top, the name of it on the side, and a test tile to show you what the glaze looks like. And I have the amount of time you dip it for. So in my class, I have most of my buckets formulated to dip for 1 Mississippi. Some are 3 Mississippi, some are in between. So when you dip it, you have to dip it for the correct amount of time, because if you dip it too long, then the glaze gets too thick, it can run off or crack. And if you dip it for too short, it's not going to be the color you want it to be. So anyway, you get your bucket, take off the lid, and then you're going to mix it up. So the first thing that I want to show you is a glaze that's unmixed so you can see the separation in it. So you can see when a glaze hasn't been used for a while, all the glaze material settles to the bottom of the bucket and all of the water rises to the top. So if you don't mix it well, you mostly will get water on your piece and it doesn't get covered. If you dip past that water, you can see all the glaze material. So it's really important that you mix the glaze for a correct amount of time in order to get all the glaze material suspended in the liquid so you have a nice thick glaze that you can dip your piece or pour glaze from here into your piece. So let's go ahead and mix the white that we're using so that we can continue our glazing process. So here's the glaze that we're going to mix. We pop the cap off and we set it to the side. We grab our whisk, you put it in, and you can tell that it was already mixed because it looks fairly good. Now, I wouldn't dip my piece in here because I don't know how long ago this was mixed. So it's really good to always mix the glaze, especially if you don't know when it was last. If you saw someone mix it and then you're ready to dip your piece, then by all means, go for it. But always mix just to be safe. And so when I mix, I like holding the whisk with my hand down like this. Like I said, I'm left-handed. And I start with small circles, big circles, small circles, big circles. And the goal of mixing is to get all the particles from the bottom of the bucket mixed up into the top. And so I want to mix it fast enough where I create a tornado. So all the particles from the bottom go up, and then I scratch the side of the bucket, the bottom of the bucket, and I do this for about 15 seconds going in one direction, and then I let it settle. Just to be safe, I'm going to do 15 seconds going the other direction to ensure that this is well mixed so I don't have any extra water in my glaze. So once again, I'm going to go the other way now. So start with small circles, then big circles, small circles, big circles, small circles, big circles. I'm going to speed it up until that tornado forms. And I know that wasn't 15 seconds, but ideally you should do it for 15. So take my advice if you want. All right. Now, when you wash this, easiest way to wash it, in my opinion, you just take it, walk it over to a bucket of water like this. We have our glaze wash station. Dunk it in the water, swish it around a little bit, pull it out, turn on the water, rinse it, and then give it a swipe with a sponge to remove any glaze particles that may be left. And then either put it in the dish rack or hang it up where you got it from. And that's how we do it in our studio. So if you're doing a full dip, and your piece is not glazed on the bottom, this is how I would recommend doing it. You take your tongs, you grab your piece, you clamp on the inside and the outside of your piece, and you dip it for the correct amount of time, which would be 1 Mississippi. So let's go ahead. 1 Mississippi, pull it out, pour all the glaze. Now, if you have a wet sponge next to you, you can take that and then gently start wiping the bottom to get all that glaze off. And then you can wipe more later and you get rid of all that glaze. And if you can pop the tongs off sooner than later, the odds of you having these little vampire bites are a little less. So to fill the vampire bites, so you take the brush, dip it in the glaze, make sure the brush is clean, of course, and then just lightly tap to fill those vampire bites. It's gonna look like a lot of liquid, but it will dry and level out, and you can always scratch it off later if it's too big. So fill those as well. And then you can see it's already starting to dry. So to level out glaze, you can either take a needle. Ideally, you should do this outside, but if you do it inside, make sure that it's over your glaze bucket or a container of water. And then you gently just scratch the surface to level out all the unwanted glaze. And you're taking little increments off at a time, because if you take off too much too fast, then what you're left with is a big missing chunk glaze. You can also use an X-Acto knife, which works really well. But same thing, take light layers off at a time, and just make sure that the glaze powder doesn't become airborne. And use your finger to then buff to level it out. Other side, same thing. Shave until it's level. And you might be wondering, why do you need to do this? Some glazes, I would say at least most glazes actually, you'll be able to see the thickness. So if it's thicker, it usually becomes a darker version of itself in that area. So if you don't want to see that, it is recommended to try to level out any high spots that you don't want to see. On the inside, it's a little more difficult, so you'll probably need a trimming tool for that. And then just like you're peeling a vegetable, shave that area down. And that's one reason why I'm not a fan of dipping entire pieces in a glaze, because it can be a little boring, just one color, and you get vampire bites. So I usually dip it in one color, and then I dip the top half in a second color, but that's for another time. All right, so this is almost done. We gotta clean the bottom, but let's go ahead and start pouring glaze into our other cups. All right, so now let's get this piece glazed. And so, like I said in the beginning, if you have tongs, you just clamp it and fully submerge, but I'm going to go ahead and pour the glaze in. So I got my measuring cup, I got my piece, and I'm gonna pour it in, fill it to the brim, pour it out, and then dip. So I have that glaze go down the side a little bit. I kind of mix it up just a little bit. And then one thing is you're gonna wanna have the lid somewhere in reach so that you can put the measuring cup on the lid after. That way you reduce the amount of mess you have to clean up. Okay, so take your piece, take your measuring cup, pour slowly, and then you can speed up the pour, fill it to the brim, kind of tilt and rotate, pour, and then dip. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, good. Now on the bucket lid, I said 1 Mississippi is fine, but because I'm swishing it around and I'm kind of lifting and doing that, I can go a little longer for this particular glaze. But make sure you talk to your instructor or your teacher for the amount of time you should dip. All right, and the reason why I don't like just dipping and holding it straight is I like these wavy lines, especially because there's wavy lines on my piece. I like that type of movement. It just makes the piece look a little more interesting in my opinion. So you can kind of see that movement. Okay, now I'm gonna let this piece dry at least 30 minutes. It's recommended to you wait 24 hours before you dip the outside. I'm gonna put this aside. And I'm gonna be going over the next one where you only put the glaze on the inside. So for this one, same thing, pour the glaze in, fill it to the brim, pour it out, and then you either dip only the rim or you just wipe away the excess. This one I'm gonna show you a different method where you don't need to fill it to the brim actually. So the other method, if you don't have enough glaze to fill to the brim or you rather not put that much glaze in, you pour the glaze in and then you tilt and you rotate and you're not coating all the way to the top. Now you may have seen some potters, they pour and rotate the glaze out. So if you do that, you basically pour and then you rotate. So I'm not the best when I do it with cups. I just like filling to the brim and flip, but you more or less can coat everything. And then wherever you miss, you can just brush on, or if you know that you can do it really quickly, you just take the glaze, pour a little bit back in, and then pour it out on that spot. Okay, and then if you want glaze on the rim, you dip it, and then you pull it out. Okay, and then ideally you want to do it all at the same time because if you let the glaze dry and then you dip the rim, you're going to get thick glaze in some spots and thinner in the other, and it's not going to be even. Okay. So I dipped a little past the rim, so you just take a wet sponge and then just wipe away the glaze that you don't want. So then you can dip the outside in the color that you do want. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe that away. It's just a wet sponge. And because I'm getting the clay on the exterior extra wet, you definitely should wait a few hours before you dip the outside. If you can wait 24 hours, even better. So I'm going to go ahead and continue wiping this until the glaze is only on the rim. And then we're going to use YouTube magic to then dip the outside of these pieces. All right, the next glaze I'm going to be using is floating blue, which is this top glaze, but I inverted. So I did white on the inside, floating blue on the outside for the other cups. And so we're going to go ahead and mix this up just like we did for our other pieces, and we're going to dip. So same thing, small circles, big circles, small circles, big circles. And if it's a low glaze like this, and you can mix it fairly evenly and fast, 15 seconds should be good. Okay, let's put this on the side and get our pieces dipped. All right, so to dip the outside, I'm gonna hold it like this. I'm gonna submerge it to the height I want it. I'm gonna move it around to create that waviness. I'm gonna count to 3 Mississippi, and I'm gonna pull it out, and then I'm gonna use the sponge to wipe all the glaze off the wax without touching the wet glaze on the piece. So here we go. We got it. We palmed it. And we're going to go ahead and dip. Ready? Let's go. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Pull it out. Shake it. You can see the magic of what wax did. And then I'm just going to gently start wiping away the excess that's on the wax. And then later on, I'm going to do a final wipe to clean the rest where there's still some left. I'm going to put this on the side. And the full dipped piece. You can double dip pieces, some all the way down to the bottom, but as you're learning what the glazes do and how much it runs, I only recommend dipping about halfway. And as a normal dip, this would be 3 seconds. But since it's a double dip, I would reduce it to 1 second because if glaze goes on too thick, it can either 1, crack, and then it pops off and then you have to reglaze everything, or 2, it's too thick and it runs off the piece like you saw in the other ones. So I'm going to go ahead, palm the bottom. And one recommendation I do have is you actually wipe this clean, ready to turn in. So as soon as you finish dipping the rim, you can just put it on the shelf to turn in. But you palm the bottom, dip 1 Mississippi, and pull it out. And same thing, I'm going to dip, move it around, and then pop it out. one Mississippi, and pop. Okay, and then some of the glaze got on the inside, and that's fine. It's gonna create a cool look. I'm gonna go ahead and put this on the side, and I'm gonna go and do the final piece. All right, the final piece for this video, the one that only the glaze will be on the outside. This is the most difficult because you have to dip all the way to the rim without the glaze going in. Now, if you want this whole section to be pure white, you have to then brush on any glaze that you may have missed. But if you don't mind the rim being a different color, you can just flip it and then dip the outside and the rim to cover where you miss. And that's what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna take my piece, and then you either have to hold it like this and dip, or hold it like this and dip. I prefer this way. Dip for 3 seconds and pull it out. And I like going in fast, and I slow down to get the rim perfectly dipped. So here we go. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, and pull. And I made a common mistake, which all of you will probably make eventually, is the bucket glaze was too low for me to fully dip all the way. So I'm gonna have to flip it over and dip the rim anyway. But I can wipe the excess glaze from the bottom, and I can clean that up a little later. But you can see how clean that bottom edge is with the wax. So that wax did a great job resisting. So you can either leave it naked, or you can add glaze. And if you want to add glaze, you either dip the same color from the top going down, which is the white, the top glaze, or you can dip the outside glaze from the bottom going up. And I'm going to do the top going down. So I'm going to go a really fast dip. Now the downside of overlapping your glazes is you'll have a line, and that line will become a darker version of the color itself. So if you are doing the same color, you may see a line of the same glaze but a darker version. My recommendation is you dip the top color, whatever that is, down. So I'm gonna wipe a little bit of this glaze off because I don't want it too thick here, and I'm gonna dip it in the white. So I'm gonna wipe a little bit because I don't want it too thick, because that was nearly a double dip on the rim. So wipe a little off. Ideally, you should wait until this dries completely, but for YouTube purposes and demo purposes, I gotta get this dip pretty quick. So I'm gonna go ahead and move this, and I'm gonna dip it in the white. So that's why I like having my inside glaze coming half down, because there's just less room for error. And I actually like the mix of these two colors, white over this. So I'm gonna dip a little further down. So here we go, dip, and pull. Okay, so it's not that full color that we talked about earlier, but I like this overlap that's gonna occur here. So I think that looks really cool. So we're gonna go ahead and get this wiped on the bottom, and then we are done with our first round of glazing. So here are the dip pieces that we did a day ago. So you can see my shirt is different now. And we are gonna go ahead and wipe the bottoms clean so that we can get it into the kiln. So a few things that you'll need is a container of water, a sponge of your choice, and I like a big car wash sponge as well. These are just car wash sponges cut into 6s, and an X-Acto knife or needle for scraping any extra glaze off. So we're gonna get started on this piece. This is the one that we just fully dipped, no wax on the bottom, and we dipped the rim. So we're gonna move these out of the way. And so for this piece, as you can see in the point of view and on top of the camera, there's still glaze on the bottom, and there's some on the foot ring. So whenever you just dip your piece and you're just wiping, I would recommend a big car wash sponge, because to clean the bottom, all you need to do is grab your piece, put it onto the car wash sponge, and then just move it around like this. And as you wipe, it will slowly start taking away whatever's on the bottom and slightly up on the edge. So you can see on the sponge that there is some residue, and on the piece itself, now this bottom foot is more or less glaze free, and it's taking a little bit off of here as well. Now for pieces, if you end up glazing all the way down to the bottom, this edge right here, you want to take off at least a 1/16 of an inch of glaze. I recommend for brand new glazes that you're testing out, a 1/4 inch is perfect. If you are familiar with the glaze, you can go as low as 1/8 of an inch. And if you're really familiar, you know it's not going to run, a 1/16 is all you really need. But as you're learning, it's always better to do more and then slowly do less as you are learning the glazes. And so this bottom edge, I would recommend wiping a little more for this piece anyway. This is a gloss white. It's pretty stable, but you can then wipe by hand to get a little higher, Or as you compress and push more, the sponge will wipe higher up and then it will remove more glaze. So you can just push a little more and then just wipe. Okay. And as you do that, this will get more covered in glaze. So then you just flip it over and use the other side. And then lastly, I just do a swipe across and I move it around. And now my edge is even higher than it was before. And on the bottom, looks like there's a little bit of residue, so I'll just do another swipe with the sponge. And this inside edge, I may have to wipe by hand. So if I have to do that, I just use a sponge and water, and then I just compress, and then I swipe back and forth to clean that up. Okay, and then that basically is done and ready to fire. I'll get myself a cookie that can fit on the foot, and then I fire. Now, one last thing, this is a student-made piece. And if you end up glazing the very inside, the bottom, you have to make sure that this bottom is not the same height as the foot. So what you got to do is get something flat, put it across the center, and look at the spacing between that flat object and the foot itself. This inside is basically touching the piece of wood. That means that as this melts, it might get stuck to whatever it touches. In this case, it will get stuck to the middle of the cookie, and then it will pop off and leave behind kiln wash on here. So with that being said, I would have to wipe a little ring in here, or a little circle. So I'll take my sponge and I just move it around, and I'll take a little more off the center, so that that middle section is not touching the edges of the foot. So that's why it's really important when you trim a foot and you trim the inside, you make sure that you lower this enough where you have clearance so it's not so close. Okay, so this is more or less done. I would put this in the kiln whenever it's ready to fire. All right, so this other piece, the beveled edge. This one, I would just wipe all the glaze off of the bottom and then the little increments over here. And there's a little bump here, a little bump of glaze that I would shave off with the X-Acto knife. So the first step that I would do is I would get my sponge, and then I would just do it by hand and not use the car wash sponge. So I compress it. When I wipe, I'm putting it right up against that edge line, and I'm only wiping with my fingertip. And I want to make sure as I'm wiping with the sponge touching the wax side. So I wipe from this side, wiping this way, I would take off all the glaze from this edge. So I compress, put it up on the edge, and then move it back and forth to get a nice clean glaze line. So I'll just work my way around, clean up the little edges that I want to make nice and clean, and I rotate. And one thing to remember, as you're wiping, you want to make sure that your hand that is touching the piece is dry. If this hand is wet, you'll start pulling off glaze because it's very powdery, it's very ashy. The more you touch it, the more you swipe, the more glaze is going to get on your fingers. So be very mindful of how you touch your piece, because you can easily over touch it and start removing glaze from the surface, and you won't really know what the repercussions will be until after it's glaze fired. Okay, so you just wipe, get that edge nice and clean. I like that nice clean line. I don't like having little bumps or fuzziness, so depends on how neurotic you want to be. I always want a nice clean glaze edge, so I spend the extra few minutes to make it nice and pretty. Okay, and then your lines, if you have words on the bottom, make sure that you get all that glaze out if you don't want to see glaze in there. Lastly, I have these little droplets here. So you want to be able to, you can scratch those off to level it out. And I do recommend you do it because sometimes that can drip or it just creates a darker version of itself in that specific color. So when you do this, this should be done in a well-ventilated area, and you should wear an N95 mask. And ideally, you should have a container of water to let the powder go into it. But to do it, you get an X-Acto knife, you go up to that edge, and then you just gently start shaving off that clay, shaving off that glaze so that it becomes flush or the same height as the area around it. And as you shave it, that looks pretty good. And then you can either take your finger and swipe it. If you dip it in water, you can smooth it out a little more. Granted, it's not fully wet. And you can do that as much or as little as you want. I have another little bit over here. So I'm going to go ahead and shave that down. And it is pretty satisfying, but you just gotta be careful taking small layers off at a time. If you try to take the whole thing off at once, you're most likely gonna pull all the glaze off and you're left with naked spot in that one area. So I'm gonna take this off too. It's always really satisfying to do this. Take this off too. And lastly, I have a little glaze drip from the white, so I'm gonna go ahead and take that off. So like I said, this is not required. It can be fine. It usually smooths out the majority of the area, but if it's really clumpy, you might, like I said, see a darker version of that color in that spot. And so if you want to add a little bit of water, you can help kind of blend that glaze. But like I said, if you put too much, you might pull the glaze off. Okay, that looks good. Bottom looks good. This one is ready to fire. All right, lastly, the one that has the foot waxed. Same steps as before. You get your sponge, get it wet, and you are wiping all the glaze off the foot, off the inside of the foot, and the outside of the foot. I want to make sure I get all the glaze off. I don't want to see any glaze there because little drops of color on the bottom kind of detract away from the overall feel of it. So a little bit of wiping goes a long way in my opinion. Okay. And on the sides, same thing. Compress, put my finger on top. I'm just wiping back and forth to remove any unwanted glaze. And then when I rotate, I got it from the foot and I rotate this way. Or I can put it like this and I rotate my hand and then I grab it. That way I don't really get my wet hand touching the piece. Okay, and then same thing, nice clean glazed line. Dip the sponge in the water as necessary and just wipe back and forth. All right, looks pretty good. There's a little bit of a bulkiness there, so I can take it and then gently level that off. And then lastly, wet finger just to swipe the dust off. And then sponge to finish the wipe. All right, and that is done. So I have my 3 pieces glazed in slightly different styles. And I'm gonna go ahead and load this in the kiln. And then in the next video, we will unload it, take a look at how it is, talk about it a little bit, and then I'll show you how I get my bottoms perfectly smooth using some standing blocks and the pottery wheel. So if that's something that you folks want to see, make sure you like and subscribe so you can see that video when it's released. And hopefully you learned something new with all this glazing. And this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to glazing. So I hope to make more glazing videos in the future. And if there's any glazing technique that you guys want to see in particular, don't forget to comment that in the comment section below. And until then, as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.